For the Dallas Mavericks, they had a interesting offseason. They made some moves and shook up a lot of the pieces of their roster. The core foundation is still intact, but they shook up a lot of the surrounding pieces that surround the core that has been built now out there in Dallas. Personally, and I will elaborate this in a minute, I was not the highest on the Klay Thompson addition. That was the big splash they made. The reason for that is that when I look at this Dallas Mavericks team, I look at a team that should be able to score the ball easier than just about any NBA team in the entire world. There is no team that should be able to get buckets with ease as the Dallas Mavericks can. Between Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, you have two of the greatest bucket getters to ever walk planet Earth. So adding Klay Thompson, as well, he is a floor spacer. From what I've seen in the past couple of seasons, it is not the most inspiring thing. Now, don't get me mistaken here. When I look at this addition of Klay Thompson to this roster, I recognize that this take could very easily be wrong. But what I can only base this upon is what has happened the past couple of seasons in Golden State. Can he still shoot the ball? Of course. Is he going to be a good floor spacer for Luka and Kyrie? Absolutely. Was he the best addition they could have made, or could they have made other maneuvers to make this team a better suited team around Luka and Kyrie? Personally, I tend to say that is the case. But let me make this clear. From what I'm looking at is because the only reason I judge this harshly is because I look at this move from a standpoint of saying, okay, they believe that adding Klay Thompson is going to make this team drastically better than they were last year. I personally don't think that. I think they say about neutral. I don't know if there was much of an improvement just by adding Klay Thompson, this version of Klay Thompson, I should say, from what they were. However, this does leave the opportunity, that I said, that if Klay Thompson has a bounce back season, that the Dallas Mavericks then obviously have been much improved. So this is not a massive picky situation. It's just my preference in saying that I do not believe that that was the best fit for the Dallas Mavericks. But this easily could turn out to be a move that is just fine because I don't think they got worse, but I just don't think that they got much better. But that could easily be proven wrong in the situation. That being said, though, let's break down this roster here. You have two guys absolutely locked and solidified starting in Luka Doncic, Kyrie Irving. One of the most dynamic, offensive gifted, dynamic duos the game of basketball has ever seen. The ability of what Kyrie Irving does, while many people have wanted to slander his name, he has gone under their value. It should have been a top 75 player in NBA history. He is, in fact, but should have made that list. Kyrie Irving is one of the most gifted scorers of the basketball that has ever been to grace the planet Earth. Kyrie Irving has the capability of taking over games at any point of the season or playoffs. He's one of the most clutch players to ever live. And then we're talking about Luka Doncic, who very well could be walking away from this NBA season as the MVP of the entire National Basketball Association. And those two guys happen to be teammates in essentially what is going to be the backcourt in Dallas once again. They are now also heading into what will be the third part of the third season in which they'll be together as teammates. And I would be shocked if this team and this duo does not take another jump forward and solidify themselves as debatably, if not the best backcourt in the entire NBA. So that's what you have to look forward to at this top of this roster. And let's go through the rest of the starters. For me, you have a little bit of flexibility there. The center spot is one of the best center rotations you've got in the NBA when it comes to situational adjustments and based upon the rest of the roster. Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford could not have been better suited centers to go fit alongside Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving than these two guys. They don't need guys like a Joel Embiid or whatever the case may be to go score buckets. They need guys that's going to protect the rim, make up for the defensive liabilities to a certain extent, and be able to be lob threats on the offensive end. You have guys that's going to be able to play all 48 minutes of a basketball game, back-to-back, subbing in, rotational, whatever the case may be, but at all times you can have Daniel Gafford or Derek Lively in the game. Either one of those guys could start. I think Lively is going to be the guy I say will be the starter this year, but regardless, both those guys are a perfect combination to fit alongside the Dallas Mavericks with Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving. I think the power forward spot's pretty much locked in as well with PJ Washington. He was a sensational pickup, somebody that when we looked at the trade deadline was probably the biggest win of the trade deadline. He could not have fit that team better. When we looked at his numbers in Charlotte, I personally was even one that said, you know what, it's hard to truly value what he's going to bring to Dallas. Well, his numbers are just inflated because it was a losing team or whatnot. Well, we learned that no, PJ Washington was actually not even playing at the level he was capable of playing at, because when he went to Dallas, he played on a winning basketball team, made winning plays, took over big-time games, and was a key piece to the success that Dallas had last year. So that is the guy that I'm pretty confident in saying also was locked in a starting spot at the power forwards position. Then we go to small forward. And to start the season, it will be Klay Thompson. Obviously, he's going to be the starter. I alluded to the point, though, just a few minutes ago, that if Klay Thompson produces in the way in which he produced with Golden State last season, there could be a lot of concerns there. I personally can only go off of what we've seen just recently, and that was not a very good season from top to bottom from Klay Thompson last year. That does not mean Klay can't bounce back. The way that Klay Thompson plays the game of basketball has never been an athletically based play style. It's always been based upon the aspect in which he's capable of shooting the ball, facing the floor, and that should be able to last a lot longer because you're not reliant on God-gifted abilities when it comes to athleticism, speed, or so on and so forth. So him having a bounce back season would not shock me by any stretch of the imagination. I just can only go off what we saw last year. So to start the year, he will be a starter. But let's say the Klay Thompson situation does not work out. Here's a few guys and why I like this roster, because they have depth and guys that I think you could maneuver and be able to adjust the roster in the depth chart so that it works out and they're A-okay throughout the remainder of the season. And those ideas for me is you have pretty much two guys. Let's say Klay Thompson doesn't work out. You move him to a bench role. The number one option for me would be Najee Marshall, a guy that I think was a very under-the-radar pickup for them in the offseason. You lose Derrick Jones Jr., who I would take over Najee Marshall, just being honest. But for the value in which you got Najee, it was a great deal for them, a great pickup. He's a guy that has been a little bit under the radar because of the extreme amount of depth they have at the forward position in New Orleans the past few seasons, that when he's been given the opportunity to play, he's played at a very, very high level. So I will not mind seeing Najee Marshall slot right into that small forward spot either. The other option you could possibly do would be Quentin Grimes. He was somebody that I don't think a lot of people recognize came over in the trade to be able to bring Klay Thompson also to Dallas. But that was a very under-the-radar pickup. Let's go back a couple of seasons. Quentin Grimes was starting to rise and become one of the very highly regarded young players in the NBA. Not necessarily a future all-star, something along those lines, but a guy that you could see as a legitimate NBA starter for 10-ish years in the NBA. And then things started to happen. He started to have some down years, and you could tell he went to a little bit of slump. Didn't really work out too well when he went out to Detroit. But when you play alongside Luka, Donic, and Kyrie Irving, there's not another guy that takes more pressure off of you than those two guys do, which should open up the opportunity for Quentin Grimes to have a much better season. Obviously, it's going to be putting him in the best position he's ever been in terms of being able to be what he is, a 3-and-D8 player. So I think that Quentin Grimes is another guy we have to keep an eye on, whether that be at the small forward position or that be in a key bench role. You talk about essentially he's replacing Josh Green, a guy that became a very critical component to the Dallas Mavericks core. He was traded off in the Klay Thompson sign-and-trade deal to go out there to Charlotte. But Quentin Grimes could easily replace what Josh Green was, and I think even has a chance to be a better player than Josh Green was. Now, as of now, it's about equal, but that's the thing that I don't think a lot of people looked at and recognize, that Quentin Grimes is also on this roster. So that is what gives me a lot of confidence in the Dallas Mavericks, because if you have a position where Klay Thompson doesn't work out, you easily have two guys that I think could easily slot in, move Klay to the bench, and everything's going to be okay, which is why I say I don't think this team got any worse. They're easily just as good. If not, you could possibly say they got better. Now let's go back to the rest of this bench. Here's another under-the-radar pickup they had at the bench spot. Spencer Dinwiddie came over on a minimum deal. He had a little bit of a up-and-down season, to say the least, last season. When he got bought out and went and ended up playing in Los Angeles, LA was a mess last year. And he didn't produce it the way he was expected to. But there's no reason to think he can't go bounce back and have a great year in Dallas. Here's why I say this. He already played in Dallas. He's already had chemistry with Luka. He knows the team. He knows the organization. He knows the way to live life out there in Dallas. There's not going to be an adjusting period for him at all. And secondly, if we recall, when it was his two teams he was coming down to, when he decided to sign with the LA Lakers, the other team was the Dallas Mavericks. There's always been a desire to get Spencer Dinwiddie back in Dallas ever since the Kyrie Irving trade that brought him back to Brooklyn. And having him now on a minimum contract was a massive bargain deal for Dallas, where you now have him slotted in as being one of the better backup point guards in the NBA. But it's not just Spencer Dinwiddie. They also have Dante Exum, who had an incredible recovery from his overall slow start to his NBA career last year. He solidified himself as a rotational piece for Dallas last year. Massive bounce back season. And he's another guy that's going to be competing with Dinwiddie now. Easily could become another guy that's in the rotation. So that's a massive thing for this team overall. Because when I look at it, as I said, you have 9 guys that I'm confident in playing. You have your starting 5 as of right now in Luka, Kyrie, Klay Thompson, PJ Washington, Derek Lively. And then you have Spencer Dinwiddie, Quentin Grimes, Najee Marshall, and Daniel Gafford, who are all guys off the bench who I'm very, very high on. And that's a very special thing, because regular season, you might play 10 or 11 guys. Postseason, you're looking at an 8-9 man rotation. Dallas already has it solidified as long as they stay healthy. And that's something that I also really like. And also, I forgot Dante Exum, but I'm basically saying that it's either going to be Dinwiddie or Exum most likely. So that's obviously a massive thing for Dallas. They have depth. They already have their playoff rotation essentially potentially set, and that's a huge thing. Let's go back down to the other extended depth pieces now for this team. Other guys on guaranteed contracts, Dwight Powell. Good locker room guy. Don't expect him to get many minutes this year. He played with the Olympic team for Canada this offseason. Wasn't too bad at all. But Dwight Powell's going to fill out the third man depth chart for the center spot. Maxi Kleber, he's another guy that could possibly be a guy you see in the rotation. Not fully confident in him. We saw him bounce back from his injury last season. Was okay, but I'm not sure if he's still the guy that we saw just a couple years ago when he was a key rotational piece, a guy that could start for the Dallas Mavericks. And I'm not sure there's a lot of minutes, but as of now, he is the backup power forward and a guy that you could possibly say you could trust. Not extremely high on him, but he's not going to have an extended role. So him being essentially the 10th or 11th man for the Dallas Mavericks is not a problem at all. But here's the guys I really want to emphasize on that I'm intrigued in. Olivier Maxence Prosper, Max, as a lot of people obviously know him as. He's going to year 2 after being drafted last year by the Dallas Mavericks. Lots of potential. Mostly was playing the G League last year, but got some minutes here and there. Now, I can't say this based upon proof or factual basis because we don't have that yet, but him being a young guy with obviously a lot of potential and has now been in the system for a year, I do have high hopes for him. I like the draft pick at the time. I do think there's a chance that he becomes that backup power forward for PJ Washington. Maybe even a potential starter down the road. But that being said, if he does take the next jump, then you're looking at 10 or 11 guys that you legitimately trust because I do think that he has a chance at passing Kleber at some point in the season. So that's the guy to keep an eye on. Obviously, I said there's no proof you can't go look at then identify and say he's going to have that year, but there's also no reason to say he can't. And so that's something to obviously keep an eye on as a potential, maybe you could say, I don't want to say X factor because it's not like that, but he's a guy that could obviously massively increase the talent level of the Dallas Mavericks if he pans out this season. And then you also have Jaden Hardy, who's going to be, as of right now, the third man depth chart at the shooting guard spot for Dallas, essentially what I've looked at. A guy that's obviously contributing when he gets the opportunity. A guy that probably won't be in the rotation consistently, but when it comes to the regular season, throwing him in there for a few minutes here and there, filling in if somebody's hurt, whatever, a guy you can easily trust. And we're talking about him being a 12, 13, 14 kind of guy. No issues with that at all. So that's the roster you have currently set for guaranteed positions. They do have a roster battle. Very rarely do you have roster battles, though, in the NBA, but they do have a roster battle. They currently have a position that if they decide to go to 15, now, remember this key note. When you talk about the new structure of the NBA, a lot of teams, specifically contender teams that are going to be over the salary cap, are only going to keep 14. You can only remain at 13 roster spots for a total of 2 weeks in the NBA. At that point in time, you must then add another addition to get your roster limit to 14. That's the set point. But you have the ability to go up to 15. But like I said, because of the new cap structure, teams don't want to go over the salary cap, thus enforcing the fact that you might not carry 15 players. But Dallas does have 2 guys on contracts that are competing for a guaranteed spot. One guy, AJ Lawson, he's on a non-guaranteed deal. He's a guy that he has a future. He's been promoted up to that non-guaranteed deal last year after he was on a 2-way. Not a bad player. Don't mind him at all. He's a solid guy. The other guy that I think will be the guy that should obviously get this spot is Markieff Morris. He signed an E9 deal. An E9 deal is essentially the opposite of an E10. E10 is a deal that you send a guy, you sign him to that Exhibit 10 deal, and they will go and play with the G League team essentially, and they get a bonus if they do so. E9 deal does not include the G League benefits, but also its protection for both the player and the team if an injury occurs. A team can essentially cut the player without charge or without a tax penalty if an injury occurs. Now, for the player standpoint, if an injury does occur, they also get a essentially insurance policy. They get a guaranteed set of money that are given to them if they get injured during training camp. A lot of veterans tend to sign this when they go into roster battles. That's the position Markieff Morris is in heading into this season. And so when I look at this battle, though, AJ Lawson is not necessarily needed. You have a lot of spots already filled. You have other young guys that are already trying to develop. If I'm going to give a spot and you go 15, I would be shocked if they don't give that spot to Markieff Morris. Because when you look at Markieff Morris, he essentially is the bodyguard for Luka Donic and Kyrie Irving. There's a guy that you need to have in your team, regardless of what you are. If you're going to be in the playoffs, that can stand up and take a punch, that can go and do the dirty work, that can do those type of jobs. You need one of those guys on every single team, especially if you want to contend. And they don't really necessarily have that. You could debate. Gafford could obviously be in that group. PJ Washington certainly is like that. But nothing like Markieff Morris, we can throw him in. There's very few players probably more feared than a guy like Markieff Morris. James Johnson's probably the only guy that comes to mind. And so having him, if you can get him back on this deal, filling out the roster at number 15 depth chart, where he just pretty much doesn't even need to play. He's there for one reason and one reason alone. That's the guy that I would like to see if they do go with 15 guys. The other guy aspect I want to talk about, and the final point, is you have 2-way deals. 2 guys, Brandon Williams, Kessler Edwards. Brandon Williams is back on a 2-way deal. Kessler Edwards was added on. Both guys have NBA experience. Both guys that I don't mind at all. And I think they're solid 2-way spots. Now, they do have one open to a roster spot, and that will likely go to a mixture of either Jason Gortman, Emmanuel Miller, Jamarian Sharp, who are all on E10 deals. I talked about they're bound for the G League for a bonus. Or they could also go sign somebody from another team as well. So that's what the two-way spot position currently looks like for the Dallas Mavericks. That being said, what do I look like? What does this team look like for this season? Well, I just talked about a minute ago. This team is obviously built to go on a deep run. They just did it last year. I just said they didn't get any worse. They could have potentially even got better, depending on how Klay Thompson pans out. Therefore, this team is clearly an NBA contender. There's no reason this team does not have the capabilities of winning an NBA championship if it all comes together. Will I say that they're my favorite to win an NBA championship this year? Personally, I won't put them there. But what is an opinion based on who you think is going to win the championship when we're still a month and a half out from the season even starting yet? Not really that important at this point in time, because so much stuff can happen between now and when the finals approach us in June of 2025. However, there is no reason to say this team is not in that top tier of NBA contenders. There's no reason this team is going to be struggling for a playoff spot. They're going to be well in there. They're going to be a top 3-4 seed in the Western Conference. They're going to be a threat. They're going to possibly be the number 1 seed. And this is a team that could very easily be playing in the NBA Finals once again.